One particular disciple of Sigmund Freud was Wilhelm Reich. And Wilhelm Reich was again, he was a Freudian psychoanalyst in the 1930s. He was committed to this model of, well, how do we undermine Catholic morality? How do we undermine the family? How do we undermine morality in society? By the way, this is an aside, but Bertolt Brecht was also one of these. Bertolt Brecht was in this, he was among these cast of characters. And Bertolt Brecht wrote the Three Penny Opera, in which one of the songs in the Three Penny Opera was "Mac the Knife," which kind of has a song in American lore. I think Frank Sinatra made it popular, but Bertolt Brecht in the Three Penny Opera was committed to producing theatrical productions that would be subversive of Christian morality by getting people to perform actions in the theater that they might never, or to see things in the theater that they might never perform or never see in their homes or in their own lives. So Wilhelm Reich, he's engaged in these Freudian efforts in the 1930s in Vienna, and you can read this in his diaries, where he basically has a few clients that are coming to him, and he observes something. He observes that inasmuch as they adhere to living Christian morality, they don't give up on God. But then he notices that if they go to something like a play by Bertolt Brecht, if they go to some performance, and in that performance, they can be goaded into seeing or doing something that goes against the sixth or the ninth commandments, that the image of God just dissipates. And so this led to a kind of demonic light to go off, or demonic darkness, right, to go off in the mind of Wilhelm Reich. Reich said that in the new means that we have available to us, the theater, the movie, advertising, television, radio, instruments or mechanisms for enabling the idea of God to dissipate without having to make arguments against the existence of God. By the way, I just want to make a little bit of an aside here, but so often these days we see these polls where people are like, they try to dig into, why are Catholics losing their faith? And so they do these polls, and they discover always these polls and the questions that they ask. People always say, well, I lost my Catholic faith when I was 10 or 11 because of science. And then all sorts of efforts are made to produce videos, institutes, websites, showing that Catholics don't have a problem with science. Well, I beg to differ. I think Wilhelm Reich understood human nature a little bit better than some of these pollsters, right? Because Wilhelm Reich understood, if I just argue with a Catholic girl in Vienna about science and God and the proofs of God's existence and whatnot, she can usually respond to me. I think we Catholics, we have a long history of faith and reason in science and how to deal with these things and the debates that can go on. I think we can distinguish between what's an opinion based on a scientific theory and what is essential to the content of the faith. I don't know anybody, I don't know if you've ever met anybody like who saw a picture of humans walking with dinosaurs, and that led to a crisis of faith that led them to lose their faith. Oh my gosh. Someone out there believes that humans walked with dinosaurs. I can't believe in God anymore. I mean, I don't know many people I don't know anyone. It's absurd. Right? But I do know a lot of people, if you start to ask, maybe for the Wilhelm Reich trajectory, right? Which Wilhelm Reich understood. If you can use the theater You can use movie, you can use advertising, you can use television. There's all sorts of ways you can use these things to change people's behavior, right? And if you can get people to do something that goes against their values, the image of God will over time dissipate. And Wilhelm Reich, he wrote the book called Sexual Revolution. The problem with those who wanted to transform culture is that there is a political party in Germany that picked up on the ideas of Wilhelm Reich. Could you guess what party that was? Right? The fascists picked up on Reich's ideas. They understood. In fact, Reich wrote a book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. And so those in the United States that were interested in using the ideas of Reich, especially in Hollywood, right, they had a little bit of a dilemma. And there's this one cultural warrior of the 40s and 50s. He basically said it's unfortunate that Wilhelm Reich and he says it's unfortunate that the Nazis picked up on some of our ideas. Those ideas were eugenics, abortion, birth control, the subversion of Christian morality in the interest of establishing some sort of neo-pagan morality, however you want to understand that. And he actually said it's going to take us a generation or two to disassociate these ideas from fascism so that we can promote them again.
Wow.
And so after the Second World War, I think you can see that in Hollywood, they keep trying to push towards a way to break the Catholic production code. And there's probably many different ways that they work at breaking the production code. I think one way is by actually, I think, trying to influence the people who worked for the Catholic bishops. And this is a whole nother story, right? But to try to get the people who worked for the Catholic bishops to really be more in alliance with the Hollywood production people than with the Catholic bishops. Right? So to kind of work at a little bit of a subversion from within. The other thing they tried to do is to come up with films that would present scenes that would create a kind of an emotional dilemma that would lead the production code to be broken. So, for example, the film that finally broke the production code was a film which nowadays has little significance as far as its quality. But in 1963, this film showed an impure scene between a black woman and a fellow who had survived the Holocaust. Right? And so this scene was purposely put into this film to basically try to say that, well, this is a serious issue, and that this serious issue that's being discussed, the Holocaust, is something that should be discussed, even though there's this impurity involved in it, right? And by 1963, through various mechanisms, that film led to the breakdown of the production code. I think also within Catholic circles, there were some intellectual leaders like John Courtney Murray that thought this idea of protesting, right, this idea of taking a pledge not to go to certain movies and voting with your feet in a way by not going to the film, that we shouldn't do those kinds of things as a way of influencing other groups of people. And so also you have, again, in the late 1950s, early 1960s, you also have this interesting debate going on, which I think is part of the Second Vatican Council, and it does have an influence here. So in the beginning of the Second Vatican Council, the famous Cardinal Ottaviani, when he was considering, or when they wrote the first statements about the media and communications going into the Second Vatican Council, right, Cardinal Ottaviani argued essentially Hollywood from the point of financing movies to producing them to directing them to actors to distribution houses. That entire chain is controlled by people who lack Catholic values and who are not like-minded with Catholics on what's appropriate in the theaters. So Cardinal Ottaviani said, if you're going to produce quality things that harmonize with an authentic culture, you need to control all points of that chain. Because if the enemies of Christ or the enemies of decency control any one of those points in the chain, they'll be able to stop you from doing what you want to do. So Cardinal Ottaviani thought, well, we just need to set up an entire chain of our own, from financing to distribution, to the distribution houses. That's really the only way to avoid, to get out of this problem. Because essentially he understood that even the production code, it's like a finger in the dike. It's like we're just objecting to this one aspect, but we're doing nothing to finance. We have, well, actually, because of the production code, there were probably Catholic directors and producers. In fact, I know one, William Park. He's now emeritus, but he used to teach at Sarah Lawrence College. He argued that it was because of the production code that you get all these great producers who are Catholics. John Ford, right? The first Coppola, Alfred Hitchcock. Actually, this guy converted to Catholicism because he realized his favorite movies from the 50s, when he was a young man, his favorite movies from the 40s and 50s were all produced by these Catholic directors. And he said they could have only done this because of the production code. It put healthy limits on them that enabled their creativity. I mean, that was his argument. And he taught at Sarah Lawrence College until he became emeritus. So Cardinal Ottaviani thought that, yeah, the production code produced, but that if you really want to you're going to need more control over more points of the process that the Catholics never really had. Now, of course, his ideas were completely sidelined in the Second Vatican Council, and what came out, I think, was that we're not going to do anything as far as protesting anymore. We're not going to. Once the production code failed, there was really no effort to try to create a new one. And in fact, for about 10 years, there wasn't even the system that we have now. I think it's still in place, right? The rating of movies, G, PG, R, and whatnot. Right? For about 10 years, there was no code. And so by 1972, 1973, the top grossing films were, I think, what we would call pornography, like clearly pornography, explicitly pornographic films. And I think that led to an effort to say, well, we should at least have some sort of code that limits what's shown in the major movie houses. But if we kind of advance the discussion to the current day, we're in a completely different environment now. Right? We're seeing perhaps the death of the movie house. At least, but maybe if not the death of the movie house, well, now we have the problem of the internet, which is changing, I think, the way that people it's changing the viewing habits of people. It's change. I don't think it's a huge change as far as it's a change as far as the mechanism of delivering the images that can shape what people think, what they do, what they say. So you could say the dream of Wilhelm Reich has become even more pronounced now. Because now, because of the internet, well, everything he thought that could be done in the movie house, it can be done on your iPhone.
Yeah.
And I think we don't need to dig too deeply. Maybe you guys have already discussed this before, but we don't need to dig too deeply into the statistics. Probably you and I both have a lot of experiences that show that what Wilhelm Reich dreamt of because of the iPhone, because of the internet, is a huge problem at this point.